Did you know meditation can help lower your stress level, boost immunity, and enhance your mental clarity? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is Tom Cronin from Australia. We're going to talk about Transcendental meditation, and it all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, it is the interview portion of our show, and we have a new guest, and we're going to talk about meditation with our guest. His name is Tom Cronin. He spent 26 years in the financial markets of Australia, high-stress job, and during that time, he discovered meditation in the early part of his career, and he had to deal with a lot of anxiety and chaos when you're dealing with the financial markets, a high-stress area, but it changed his world when he discovered meditation. And I'm a meditator also. I do TM, and I've been meditating for about 25 years. So we're going to have a lot of things in common to talk about. And I also came from a high stress world of New York City advertising, Madison Avenue, Mad Men, all of that. So I think we have a lot in common. So let me tell you a little bit more about Tom before I formally introduce him to our audience. He's the founder of the Stillness Project, which is a global movement inspiring over 1 billion people to sit in stillness daily. Tom's passionate about reducing stress and chaos in people's lives, and his work in transformational leadership coaching and corporate training has seen him working with some of the largest companies in the world, including Amazon, Oracle, Harvard Business School, Qantas, UBS, and even Coca-Cola. He's spoken on stage at conferences, and he's got 6 books. Insights, The Path to Peace, A Guide to Living with Ease in a Rapidly Changing World. He's got, as one of them, he's got a whole bunch of others about sleep, calm, spirit, soul, and also a children's book. And he has a movie that's called The Portal. It's all about kind of breaking through from the chaos of our crazy world and learning to be still and learning the power and the benefits of meditation. I'm delighted to welcome Tom Cronin to Guys Radio. Welcome, Tom.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So I guess we have a lot in common, but I want to hear your story. And I think our audience would love to know about your personal journey and your kind of quote unquote rashi with meditation and how it has evolved over the years. So what happened to you? You were in a high stress job. I was in a high stress job. You're doing meditation worldwide. What was the kind of inciting incident with you that really clicked you through to a new path?
Yeah, I think, it's good for us to go back to the word you mentioned, rashi, and explain to the audience what this actually means. So in Sanskrit, this is a phenomenon that is a wonderful force of evolution. And just remembering that the power of evolution is always working through us at all times, through the entire cosmos. And when we deny or try to block that natural process of us evolving, growing, learning, we get these cues, these impulses to guide us, to move us forward. And usually it's pain and suffering. But if we ignore the pain and suffering, then it gets gargantuan to the point of choicelessness. And this is really what they call in engineering terms a bifurcation point, which is where something breaks down or breaks through. So I had a rashi at the age of 29. It was a cataclysmic event of deep, dark nights of the soul. It was extreme anxiety, panic attacks, depression, insomnia, which culminated, as I continued to ignore that, into this pivotal moment, which was really a breakdown or breakthrough moment where I was in suicide ideation, really contemplating whether I wanted to go on with my life with the sort of life that I was living, with all riddled with anxiety, depression, but also addictions. And then it was in that time that I found meditation, and it was actually watching a documentary about a property developer who was very successful. And he talked about how he used that word, transcendental meditation. And for me, I was really interested in this idea of transcending using lots of drugs and drinking. But when I heard this idea of going beyond, because to transcend means to go beyond, that's really what I was trying to do all the time in the raves and the nightclubs and the drugs and the drinking. I wanted to get out of it. And so it was like a light bulb moment for me. And that's when I started to look into not just TM, but also other forms of meditation. But when I learned Transcendental meditation, also known these days in my community as Vedic meditation, it really was a light bulb moment. It was a transformational week or two that really turned my life around. And so all the anxiety and panic attacks and depression and addiction started to just slowly melt away, and some of it quite quickly, actually. And I went back to work and I continued on for 16 more years initially,
Oh,
working as a broker, but just no more drugs and drinking and meditating. And then eventually left that to start teaching and running retreats and speaking.
amazing story. For the benefit of our audience, when we talk about TM, it's a mantra kind of meditation, and then there's universal mantras, which are certain phrases that have a vibration, a frequency to them, and then there's also guru mantras where you're given a specific set of words or sounds that are for you specifically. Did you study TM, the classic TM, and were given a specific guru mantra?
Yeah, and we actually call them Bij mantras, Bija. And a Bij mantra is different from, say, Om Namah Shivaya or Om Mani Padme Hum, which were
Hmm.
what we call mantra meditation mantras, where you use your mala beads and you repeat that mantra out loud and you continue to move across the 108 beads in your mala beads to recite those mantras. But with these specific mantras that I received from my teacher, I received a Bij mantra in the initiation of the TM tradition. And that was where you use that mantra to take the mind inward deeper and deeper, silently and silently, until we get into the subtlest realm, which is where we transcend. And to
Hmm.
transcend means to go beyond your thoughts, your emotional body, and beyond your physical body, and into this beautiful, eternal, infinite, unbounded, almost void of spaciousness, which is really a wonderful experience.
Now, for people also who don't really know too much about TM, the idea is to do two 20-minute sessions, just repeating to yourself your mantra, and you kind of go deep. You use the mantra to kind of go in, and then you come out again a little bit, and you go deeper down. And I found, and I'd like to get your experience on this, Tom, and I think it would also help our audience, people who are considering TM, is I found the first 3 months or so of doing TM, I was all of these things, experiences in my life from the past were coming up. Everything was bubbling to the surface, and then they process through. I still get those at certain times. Like yesterday, I was meditating, and all of a sudden, I was running around Central Park. I was there, and I find myself projecting to these different places and different experiences, and kind of reliving them and processing them. And it's a clearing process for me. And then other times I'm just in a blank space and some information comes in, or I might be working with aspects of my higher self. What's the experience been like for you over time doing TM?
Yeah, it's exactly like you said. It's kind of twofold in many respects. It's firstly, we can drop into really deep spaces of transcendence, which is really deeply relaxing, firstly, and really healing on your nervous system, healing on your body. And it's a really beautiful, quiet peacefulness that prevails in that transcendent experience. But what that can also lead to is a clearing, which is the body's natural capacity and inclination to release and clear out anomalies that have accumulated into your system like a sponge, and your body sponged up life experiences. And in these deep levels of rest and peace, the body naturally starts to clear and release these stresses that are holding you back and keeping you in recurring states of low vibration. And an example, just for everyone, is interesting because it's so real in that it was happening just last night and this morning. I had a student of mine that had contacted me and saying that she only learned recently, and she said that she's been getting these horrendous nightmares of her sort of being chased by monsters. And I said, well, look, when we sleep, what happens is similar to what happens when we meditate, is that this gives the body the opportunity to release stresses. And we go into deep sleep in the first stage of our sleep, which is also what happens with our meditation. We start dropping into deep. And then we start coming back to the surface in our sleep, which is dream state. And that's because the deep, deep sleep has started to release stresses in your body. And the meditation has been helping her release deeper stresses than sleep could release. And I said that the releasing that's happening in your meditation is continuing on in your sleep. And then she revealed to me, I said to her this morning, I said, how did you go last night? Did you get nightmares? And she goes, you know what? I had this incredible epiphany that when I was at school, I was really always chased down by bullies, and I had a really horrendous school experience. And I was always scared and I was always afraid. And I realized I had this incredible light bulb moment that I was releasing all this trauma from school that I'd suppressed for so long. And the meditation had helped her release the stress that's been suppressed. And it starts to come to the surface and it continues releasing in her dreams. And then in her dreams, the story of that is being somehow created in the mind. And so I said, you've been chased by the monsters. Is you releasing the stress of being chased at school by these bullies? And that's starting to come out of your system now. That doesn't have to be in there anymore.
That makes perfect sense. My special guest on Guys Radio, spiritual teacher, meditation teacher, filmmaker, writer, the amazing Tom Cronin, with us from Sydney, Australia today. When you were a high-powered guy and you were in a high-stress job, and I'll tell you my experience. I noticed, and I was in the liquor business too. I did Bacardi, Stoli, 1800 tequila. We were out and we were living the brand. And if I was doing meditation or something like that then and talking about it with my coworkers, they would think I was crazy. But I kind of, on my own time, I learned Reiki, I learned hypnosis, and I was doing some of these things on my own, and I was meditating on my own, but I never mentioned it to my coworkers. And I've also found over time that when we're on this spiritual path, it's not an easy one. And what happens is some of the folks that you were tight with, they kind of fall away and new folks come in kind of organically. Tell us about your experience dealing with, your coworkers, your colleagues, and like your friends and your family. How did they take this whole change?
Yeah, it's exactly like you said. Some people will drop away and some people will come in. And definitely there was, for me initially, a lot of quietness. I didn't really mention it to a lot of people. This was back in the 90s and probably similar to you. The world was not really quite open to things like spirituality, meditation. We didn't have apps like Calm and Headspace and companies meditating. So, this was a kind of wild times back then. And so it was very unusual for someone to be meditating. So I kept it pretty quiet. But over time, I started to be a little bit more open about it. But definitely, as I changed my lifestyle habits, I stopped drinking and taking drugs, and I didn't want to stay out late. I like to get up early with the sunrise and do some yoga and meditate, and was really turning my life around. But that left some changes in who I felt affinity and alignment with. And this is something that it's really good to have a mentor or a guide or a teacher to support you on your journey. We always support our students because life will change when you start changing your inner state. And some of those changes can be a little bit, discombobulating in some ways. All of a sudden, you had these deep friendships that were built around you taking lots of drugs and drinking, for instance. Then those friendships, you might find that they start to lose some point of relevance in your life. So navigating through that with a sense of it's okay, and just trusting the process that more aligned relationships and friendships will come in. And also, that might be locations where you might not feel relevant anymore. For me, over time, I just didn't want to spend my days on a big trading room floor yelling and screaming. I wanted to spend my days in bungalows in Bali running retreats and with coaching clients, teaching them to meditate, or working with companies teaching meditation. So just navigating through that diversity and that change is important.
And this, of course, we're not putting our old friends down. It's just you kind of naturally kind of evolve and you don't feel like you have as much in common vibrationally. And so other people come in, and some of the folks you were tight with, sometimes they fall away a little bit, but that's not a condemnation or criticism of them, correct?
Absolutely. It's just an acceptance. We're all vibrational beings, and there's a resonance, and sometimes that resonance can be misaligned based upon our state. And obviously our goal, and ideally not necessarily a goal, but what's possible, is that we can support other people in their transformations as well by continuing to be true to our transformation. And this is how we ultimately, ideally, help make the world a better place, by all of us, being open to the idea that we can raise our vibration. And we always talk about someone being in a high vibe or a low vibe, and this is a resonance. And so it's not a judgment, it's just an acceptance that where everyone's at is okay for them, and where you want to be is true for you, and where you want to get to. And maybe along the way, you might support other people to get into high vibrations as well.
when you're dealing with high-powered corporations, and I've worked on the client side and the agency side, and everybody's into the almighty dollar or whatever the currency is, and they bring in some people, experts like yourself, to talk about meditation and things like that. And then, what's been your experience like? Because on one hand, they want to have a benefit for their group, for their the employees. On the other hand, they want them to be killers out there also because it's all about the bottom line. And then you have some people who were forced to go to the seminar, if you will, and other people who wanted to go. And some of these companies, they're watching who's who there because I'm sure there's some trepidation and there's some, if they really look at the bigger picture though, there's a huge benefit because if you have employees that are relaxed and in sync with vibration and frequency, they can actually do a much better job and create a more peaceful culture to work from. What's been your experience with that? It's tricky, isn't it? Because all these companies that you've worked with, whether it be Amazon, Coca-Cola, UBS, they're all very different from a cultural standpoint.
Yeah, when you're working with the public, like B2C, we call it business to consumer, when
Mm-hmm.
people come to my retreats or they sign up for meditation, they're willingly, enthusiastically, and financially made an exchange to have that experience. I want this. And so there's a really deep level of inquiry and enthusiasm for it. But when you're in a corporate and the company's paid you to be on stage or paid you to run that program, there's going to be, I always know that 30% of that audience just won't be interested in what I've got to say. 30% of the audience will be like blown away by what I've got to say and just be like, tell me more. How do I find out how I work with you more? And then, the rest of the audience, the other 40% are kind of like, curious, but maybe just sitting in the middle of the fence. And so I generally get that roughly with most audiences. And, I had one where one guy was literally tapping away on his computer the whole way through the keynote. He had absolutely zero interest. Another guy was looking at his watch the whole time. And look, it's okay. I was like that as well. I had friends telling me for 5 years with all my addictions and anxiety and depression that I should meditate. And I was just like sticking my fingers in the air going, I'm not listening to you. I'm not listening to you. So, everyone's where they're at because that's where they're at and that's okay. I don't have any judgment and I don't have any expectation about them needing to be someone else. But the beautiful thing with going into an organization is that the company, and I tell them, not everyone's going to want to hear this, but the people that do and will, it will really land for them. And you might want to run a PT training session, personal training session for some people that want to just go and punch a boxing bag, and that's okay for them as
Mm-hmm.
well. Whatever works for your community, have diversity in your offering for mental health and well-being. And sometimes people just aren't ready for some of these things. So it's just a matter of you're getting paid for the gig and doing the best you can and appealing to the biggest audience you possibly can.
Now, when you, as a logistical framework, when you go into these companies, you go in through HR, through the marketing department, through the president. How do you get yourself in there?
Yeah, through different ways. Sometimes they're reaching out to me through Google and word of mouth sort of referees,
Mm-hmm.
where they'll come to my website and then they'll inquire through my website. And usually it's the people and culture or HR.
Mm-hmm.
So in Australia, I don't know if you have it in America. It's a new area within a company called people and culture,
Yeah.
and that they're usually the ones that are sort of the ones in charge of making sure that their staff are managing their day-to-day work well. And then other times I'll do some direct approaching as well. So people that I
Mm-hmm.
worked with on the B2C side of things that come on my retreats or do my training programs, they know that there's the potential for me to go into their organization. So sometimes they will lead me in and invite me to go and speak at their company, or put me in touch with their HR departments. So it's different ways.
Okay. What was it like the very first time you got in front of a corporate audience to deliver your presentation? What was that like for you? I'm just curious because I can relate to it. And I'm sure it was like, there was nerve-wracking in a way, but otherwise it probably was exhilarating.
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Fear and excitement are such similar energies. They're so close to each
Mm-hmm.
other. And the beautiful thing is that they can actually be combined. It's like when people are on the roller coaster ride, there's excitement and fear. And so definitely in the early days, there was probably a little bit more fear than excitement. But these days, there's just excitement. I've got a presentation next week at an event with Jane Fonda, and there's 6,000
I saw
people in the
that.
auditorium. So, those sorts of things these days just really light me up, and I get very excited about. And the way I shift this, just for anyone listening that's thinking about going into speaking or are speakers, the way I shift this is thinking about who in the audience's life can I change? Really moving your attention away from how you feel to what can I change in someone else's state as a result of me being on that stage? So really shifting your attention to the benefits and the impact you're going to have on the people in the audience.
Now, my special guest on Guys Radio again is Tom Cronin, worldwide spiritual teacher, motivational speaker, filmmaker, and so much more, author. You talk about, Tom, the 7 states of consciousness. What are those, and how do you kind of learn about that, and how do you deploy that?
Yeah, so we generally teach this in the last session. When you learn Vedic meditation or Transcendental meditation, it's trained over 4 sessions, 4 90-minute sessions. And the last session, we sort of get into more advanced knowledge and philosophy, and we cover the 7 states of consciousness. And I've put that knowledge into a book called Spirit and Soul, which people can get on my website, which dives deeper into an understanding of these 7 states of consciousness that are available for humanity. And the first state that everyone's in is thinking state, and all our thoughts generally most of the time revolve around ourself because it's very egocentric, because the thoughts are the ego. Then we go into deep sleep, where we have an unconscious state of existence where every night we lose our thoughts, but we also lose a sense of identity and we're unconscious, which is why we need to lie down on a soft bed. Then we go to dream state, which is like that lady that had the scary monsters chasing her. And that's where we start unlocking stresses and we start getting back into the thinking realm whilst we're still asleep. And then the 4th state, which is a very rare state, not many people go into this state until they start meditating these deeper meditations. This is called Turiya, the 4th state. Turiya in Sanskrit means the 4th. And that means you're awake and not thinking. So very different than the first state where you're awake and thinking. Now you're awake and not thinking. And we harness that in a compartmentalized window of time called a meditation practice. And then what happens when we start integrating Turiya and that 4th state into the 1st state, and then the 4th state into the 1st state, we start to see those 2 states infuse into one. And that comes through that consistent twice-a-day meditation where your thinking state gets infused with a non-changing background conscious awareness. So now we have foreground thoughts and background conscious awareness that can be witnessing the thoughts, but also witnessing your actions or witnessing life itself from conscious awareness itself. And this is the 5th state called cosmic consciousness. And then we've got 2 more very advanced states. We've got God consciousness, where we start witnessing the divine in form and phenomenon outside of us through the portal of our 5 senses, which is a really beautiful, loving and enhanced state of consciousness, really magical state of consciousness where you start to experience the divine playing out all around us. And then unity consciousness is a very advanced state. Not many people on the planet are in this state. It's a non-dualistic state. Non-dual meaning that you've gone beyond your own individualized egoic identity and you're starting experiencing yourself as the oneness field in what we call unity consciousness. And this kind of comes back to Einstein's unified field theory concept that everything is actually part of one thing. It just seems and looks separate, but in actual fact, it's an interwoven web of ultimately an intelligent field that is very, very subtle beyond form. And in unity consciousness, we really start to experience that. Almost like the analogy I use when I'm teaching, the wave now realizes that it's actually the ocean and not the wave. It's a wave temporarily, but ultimately it's always the ocean.
Now, sleep you had mentioned, and I think that's an issue that so many people have where they're having more and more trouble sleeping and people wake up in the middle of the night, etc. What is the issue that you find, the core issue with sleep, and what is your book about that addresses deeper, faster sleep?
Yeah, we have 2 main reasons why we are insomniacs or have trouble sleeping, which is about 90% of the world these days from what I'm hearing. Firstly, it's that we have too much cortisol in our blood. When we get to sleep, there's just still a lingering residue of cortisol, and that's preventing us from getting to sleep, or it's making us wake up around 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's that jittery, people don't realize we're in it because we're all in it. And so we're all moving fast. We're all in that hyperstimulation. We're all craving dopamine. And this is leading to heightened levels of cortisol and adrenaline in our blood, which really prevents us from producing the melatonin, which is what we need to fall asleep. A lot of people are still in that cortisol-induced state and then taking melatonin tablets, but the cortisol can still override that. So we really got to have strategies to reduce the cortisol before we get to sleep, and that's where the TM comes in. It's a really great practice that will reduce the cortisol very quickly in your meditation experience. The second reason is that we're just addicted to our story, and that's where the mind is just so busy. And that's not a cortisol issue, that's an overthinking issue and also an attachment issue to you and to your story. And what we want to do is we want to surrender being anyone, surrender being anywhere, surrender being meaningful, surrendering having purpose or having regrets and shame, and really mastering the mind and saying, there's no need to think right now. There is absolutely no need to think. I'm not interested in thinking. I'm not interested in the story. I'm not interested in my day. I'm not interested in tomorrow. All I want to do right now is just surrender any form of thought and just get into being, which is non-thought, and then you'll fall asleep very, very quickly.
How did you initially, when you got on this, went on this journey? How did you start? What was your view of the world, and how has that evolved now? Factoring in that the world has changed dramatically, probably since you began on your path and where we are right now.
I'd like to say we're in a much better place. I'm just not sure. And sometimes things, as it was for me and what we see in the film as well, with those 6 stories, sometimes things need to get to crisis. You know, if we're not adaptive enough, if we aren't able to get those cues and those hints and make changes before we get to crisis, then maybe we just need crisis. Sometimes I think the world's in such a good place because we've got so many more people doing breath work and meditation and yoga and retreats and corporates doing all of this work. But then sometimes I look at the world and think, gosh, we're still where we were 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, with people rape, pillage and plunder, and still going into conflict, still domestic violence, still people depending on big pharma and a medical system that's conditioning them in ways that they don't necessarily, not really good for them. And I don't know, there's still a lot of problems in the world. So I oscillate and I grapple with this myself, with the conundrum is, are we getting better? Am I actually making any benefit to the world? Am I changing people's lives? I don't know. Sometimes we get these existential questions that really are deep contemplative questions. But I have a great deal of hope that I think we're moving towards an enlightened planet, otherwise known as Satyuga, and that conversations that you and I are having right now with you in San Diego and me in Bondi, with technology giving us this opportunity to have this conversation that, you know, we couldn't have 20 years ago in this format, and B, have all of you wonderful people listening in right now while you're driving along the LA freeway or walking your dog in London, or, you know, sitting on a beach somewhere in Spain, and having the ability to listen to the tone of our voices, the knowledge, the words that we're speaking, and hopefully in some way, shape or form, it's changing your own resonance and vibrational state.
Great answer, Tom. What's your perspective on devices? Now, obviously, one of the things that's so interruptive, and it's all obviously everybody's addicted to it, is our devices. Whether it's your iPhone, your iPad, or your laptop, everybody's connected all the time, and it is an addiction. And it's starting younger and younger. I can see I have a 12-year-old son, and it's like, give me that iPad, you know, get off the phone. I mean, there's a big world out there, a natural world that you want to experience. And I'm concerned about the future because of that, because how we're going to break people of this habit that's not very good for them.
Yeah, you know, I went out the other night to get some takeaway dinner, and while I was waiting for the food to get prepared and made, I was watching this table. There was 4 young gentlemen. They would have been in their mid-20s, maybe young 20s. And they were at the table, obviously catching up for dinner. And the entire time, and I would have been there 20, 25 minutes, the entire time, they were on their phones, all 4 of them. And they'd come together to commune and congregate. And I don't think they spoke more than 3 words together. It was mind-boggling to think that this is where we're at now. And I just peered over, not to be nosy, but I was curious as to what was keeping them so consumed in their phones, and they were playing some little games. But they all were playing separate games on their phones in a communal space. And so I think we're losing that wonderful human intimacy of conversation and deep, you know, deep questioning and deep conversation and checking in with people. How are you going? How is life? You know, if they're on their phones deep in a computer game and they've got a problem in their life that they're not able to discuss with their mum and dad, then how are they going to talk about it with their friends if we're all on a phone?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
Exactly.
so solving our own personal problems is getting more challenging, and I guess the dilemma there is that people are going to ChatGPT to be the source for their problem, which is back on the device again, source of solving their problem, I should say, in some form of therapy. But I think, yeah, it's polarized, I think, because the gadgets actually also enable us to
Mm-hmm.
convey knowledge. You know, my business and my ability to impact people around the world really is dependent upon the devices. You know, I had someone inquire about my Bali retreat this morning on Instagram. So that wouldn't have happened without Instagram and her
Mm-hmm.
knowing that there was a Bali
Yep.
retreat. So it's not just to say this is an evil, we've got to get rid of it. It's about how do we coexist in a conscious way that enables us to not be disempowered because of the devices or by the devices, but teaching our children sovereignty and teaching them cause and effect. And I said to my kids, I've got two 23-year-olds now, and they live with us. They're beautiful angels. And, you know, we've gotten through those complexities of 12 to 18. You're just
Mm-hmm.
entering into the war zone.
Oh yeah.
Sorry to
Tell me about
say.
it. I know.
Um, but, you know, I said to my kids when they're about 12, I said, you know, you guys, you get to choose whatever you want to do. You know, if you want to do crack cocaine, knock yourself out, go for it. But I want you to remember the mechanics of cause and effect, because every action has a reaction. So if you don't do your homework, watch what happens with your school grades, with your principal, with your teachers, with us. Watch what happens when you help the lady cross the road. She'll give you a $5 bill and say, thank you so much, you're amazing. And you'll feel really good about yourself. Watch what happens if you steal her wallet and go running down the street and then someone crash tackles you and you go to prison. You know, everything is cause and effect. And so teaching children how to navigate the complexity of their own well-being, their mental health space, their physical health space. You can eat whatever you want, but watch what that's going to do to you. Look at your energy levels. So I think it's not about just taking something away from our children. It's about helping them become empowered, that all the way through their life, they're going to make good choices and bad choices. And the universe will be the messaging signal to remind them which one was good and which one was bad.
And I think one of the challenges with devices, and they are helpful, is that I wonder, are people realizing that we are the drop in the ocean, but we're the ocean also, and that you can call upon the universe. You are part of the universe. You are divinity because you have a spark of divinity inside. How do you communicate? How do you get that over to people? How do you teach people that they have so much more power than they've been told? Because I think there's a plan in place by the powers that be to keep us kind of ignorant and feeling low self-esteem and dependent, and really it's just the opposite. We have a lot of power, and it can be dangerous to those who are kind of quote unquote in charge of some of the 3D stuff.
Yeah, it's such important knowledge that you're talking about there. I think the way I see it is that if I have the capacity to teach someone quantum physics, I need to be patient and understand that they need to go to grade 1 and learn 1 plus 1 equals 2, then grade 4 and 4 times 4 is 16, and grade 10 and realize that there's trigonometry, and there's a sequential evolution in their capacity to learn and absorb knowledge that's not just dump it all in one go. So I think for me personally, it's about giving people the respect that they deserve in evolving, and giving them the patience they deserve in being ready for certain knowledge at certain times. Some things the world's just not ready to hear, maybe, or some people just might not be ready to hear, not being able to digest that. And so knowing who's receptive and capable of hearing that information rather than just blasting it out there. There's a beautiful saying, the wise do not bewilder the ignorant. And so I think being mindful of our audience's receptive capacity is a critical thing. If I start talking about 5-dimensional, energetic systems with an audience at Amazon, I might be booed off the stage and maybe not get given
Right.
the check for my keynote presentation. So
That's hilarious. Now, you've done a wonderful film. I just viewed it today, actually. It's called The Portal, and it's an experiential type of thing. It's not, I was like watching it, and at first I'm like, because the last film I saw was the Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, and I started watching your film. I'm like, this is very different because I'm looking for the inciting incident, et cetera. And it's not, it is an experiential story about six different individuals and hitting that kind of trauma point where something happened to them that really incited a change in them. Similar to, it is a story because their stories change based on their own inciting incidents. And most of them had to deal with some type of trauma, if you will. Is that accurate depiction of what you tried to put together?
yeah, I like that you really tuned into this, that it is an experience. And look, the first 20 minutes, admittedly, and I apologize to everyone if you hadn't managed to get through the first 20 minutes, it's not easy. Particularly a lot of people that were, sitting on their sofa with their popcorn ready to watch a film about meditation. That first 20 minutes is about war and bombing and people's getting stabbed, and it's uncomfortable. And we set that up to start the audience with where they're at and know that the world is stressed, and to start with where our audience in the community, so where our stars in the film are at, which is they were stressed. And then we move the film from those particular scenes, gradually changing the tone of the music and the vibrations. We use binaural beats and moving the editing into a way of getting people calmer. And then eventually we take them into a meditation experience. It's slightly different these days where they're watching it online. In the cinemas, we had a different cut for the film, and that meditation was up to 5 minutes. So it was a beautiful, calming darkness that happens in the cinema, and it was really powerful. People had quite phenomenal shifts by putting them into meditation in the cinemas. But when you're at home, people might get a little bit distracted and start picking up their phones. So we condense that down to 30 seconds. But yeah, really, it's about that.
What advice would you give, Tom, to people who are curious? There's so many more people now, whether it's about their diet or their wellness or their longevity or the foods they eat or the spirituality, and they want to learn more. And you know that you're just putting their toe in the water. And you can tell when that happens. And there's more and more and more people who are like that. What advice would you give them to really be able to get themselves set along the path a little bit quicker?
I always think just go all in and learn Transcendental meditation or Vedic meditation. Find a teacher. Dithering and dathering around the edges. The first thing that I always find when it comes to, for me, working with someone is it's very hard to change someone's way of thinking. This is where psychology and therapy can take decades to have some impact on someone, because we have these things called vasanas, which are neurological patterns of thought that are so deeply grooved into the way we think that sitting down on a sofa and talking about someone and then leaving that sofa, we just default back into those vasanas very, very quickly, and not much really changes. And not to discredit and dismiss therapy and psychology, definitely there's relevance and reasons and roles for that. But I find if we can transcend that way of thinking and get into consciousness itself, we start to embrace more wisdom and more knowingness and more adaptive capacity. We become much more flexible, much more adaptable when we start doing those deeper meditations. So I generally say to someone, if you really want to turn your life around, and I see this happen so quickly with people that have started this meditation technique, that we find physically, mentally, and emotionally and spiritually, things start to change very, very quickly when they start doing that.
Okay, one very small thing. A lot of people have trouble getting into meditation is that they have the little monkey mind going, the chatter. What's a good way of kind of getting past that?
Well, I think really the mantras is such a powerful device. We talked about devices before, and the mind won't want to stop thinking. The mind doesn't like to stop thinking. The mind likes to be in the future and the past because it finds that process very charming, very enigmatic. And what we want to do is we want to introduce something more charming than thinking. And that's where the mantra comes in, because your mind will continue to jump around. It's just what the mind does. So when we have that repetition of the mantra, it has this wonderful calming effect on the mind and this wonderful luring effect to attract the mind inward, away from the form and phenomenon of the outside world, which is exciting, to the subtle world, which is de-exciting. So I really find that if you can get a teacher and get your mantra and use mantras in your meditation, it will be much more effective.
Great advice. Tom, tell everybody where they can find more about you. Everybody, Tom Cronin, amazingly measured, present, spiritual teacher, a filmmaker, author, just a great guy, and really have a wonderful way of putting together and kind of presenting everything that you've learned. So thank you so much for what you're doing. Tell everybody where they can find more about you and some of the courses you have and retreats, etc.
Yeah, look, I'd love to hear from you all listening. Come to my Instagram. I just find Instagram, for some reason, talking about devices, it's just a really easy app for communicating. YouTube, TikTok, I find it really hard to build community and have conversations. But Tom Cronin is just one word, TomCronin, Tom Cronin on Instagram. Come and reach out, say hello, or otherwise come to my website, tomcronin.com. And you'll find out about, we've got a beautiful retreat happening up in Bali. It's nearly sold out, but there's still a few spots left. And that's a really deep immersion in the wonderful forests up in the mountains of Bali. And then we've got meditation programs and coaching programs as well.
Fantastic. Well, Tom, keep doing what you're doing. Pleasure to meet you. I hope you'll come back again. And I just admire of your work and view as a person. And I love your presentation. So keep on keeping on, brother.
Thanks so much. And thanks for listening, everyone. It's great to share space with you.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys TV and Guys Radio, please support us by subscribing to our channels and platforms. Thank you.